We know life's busy, right?
Yeah.
And keeping up with everything, trying to make sense of it all, it's a challenge.
It really is. Information overload is real.
So what we try to do here is, cut through the noise, give you the important stuff, the core insights, without you needing to sift through everything yourself.
Get straight to the heart of it.
Exactly. And today, we're focusing on something pretty significant that just happened. India's Operation Sindoor.
Right, May 7th. And this wasn't just another military strike you read about briefly?
No?
No, I mean, what we saw was actually a really complex operation. It's got layers, strategy, symbolism, politics. It's all woven together.
It's the kind of thing where the headlines, they just sort of scratch the surface, don't they?
Completely. There's much more going on beneath.
And that name, Operation Sindoor, it's unusual for a military op, isn't it? Kind of jumps out at you.
It does. It immediately signals there's, well, something deeper being communicated.
So we saw the initial news, who, what, where, when. But our mission today in this deep dive is to really unpack the why. The thinking behind it, the strategy, and maybe what comes next. We're going to use the information we've gathered to piece that together.
Exactly. Go beyond those first reports and look at the bigger picture here.
Okay, so let's get right to it. What actually kicked this whole thing off? The catalyst for Operation Sindoor. That seems to point back to Pahalgam.
Yes, absolutely. April 22nd, 2025, Pahalgam, a place in Jammu and Kashmir that, most people think of as serene, peaceful even.
Right, beautiful area.
And it became the scene of just a horrific attack. 26 people killed, and tragically, most were tourists just visiting the area.
Just devastating. It shatters that sense of peace.
Completely. It was a brutal shock, and the impact on India's sort of national sense of security was immediate, very profound.
You can almost feel that sense of vulnerability, that feeling of nowhere being truly safe. And suspicion fell pretty quickly on some familiar groups.
Yeah, the usual suspects, unfortunately. Jaish-e-Mohammed, JEM, and Lashkar-Taiba, Lati groups with a long, documented history of attacks like this.
Okay.
And the reaction within India, well, it was massive. Widespread grief, anger pouring out on social media, and immense pressure building on the government to act, to do something significant.
So it really feels like that Pahalgam attack was the direct trigger. It pushed things towards Operation Sindoor.
Right.
Let's talk about the operation itself then. What did it actually look like on the ground?
Okay, so it happened in the early hours of May 7th, very early, between 5 a.m. and 1:30 a.m. A really tight window, just 25 minutes.
Fast.
Very fast. Indian forces carried out strikes against 9 locations. These were identified as terrorist hideouts, key infrastructure spread across Pakistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir.
9 locations.
Mm.
Any specifics on the targets?
Yes, significant ones, like Jimma's main headquarters in Bahawalpur, Pakistan, and LAT's major base over in Muridki, plus other spots in places like Kotli and Muzaffarabad and PoK. So, strategic centers for these groups.
And the official word from the Indian Army came pretty soon after.
It did. Around 1:44 a.m., they released a statement. And the language was very carefully chosen.
How so?
They described it as focused, measured, and non-escalatory. That last part is key. And they were very specific. Targets were terrorist infrastructure, not Pakistani military installations.
That distinction feels crucial. Like they were trying to hit the terrorists but avoid, a wider war.
Absolutely. It points towards very careful planning, likely based on solid intelligence. You're talking satellite images, maybe intercepted communications, human intelligence on the ground. Precision was clearly the goal.
And the strategic message behind it.
Well, the main aim seems to have been sending a very clear, very direct message to Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI, the so-called deep state.
Which India often accuses of supporting these groups.
Exactly. India has long held that the ISI provides backing and safe havens. So this operation looks like a direct signal. We know where they are and we can reach them. It bypasses maybe the usual diplomatic notes and delivers the message kinetically.
And the timing. Pakistan's facing some serious economic headwinds right now. That feels relevant too, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. It adds another layer of pressure. It's not just a military response. It comes when Pakistan is economically vulnerable. That likely amplifies the impact, makes the cost potentially higher for them.
Okay, so how did Pakistan react? Predictably, I imagine. Quite strongly.
Yes, very strong condemnation almost immediately. Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif called it cowardly and vowed a resolute response. Standard rhetoric in these situations, but still significant.
Did they convene their Security Council?
They did. Pakistan's National Security Council met and reportedly authorized military action in response, though they didn't really specify what that action would entail, kept it quite vague.
And then their version of events started coming out, which sounded quite different from India's.
Radically different.
Yeah.
Pakistan claimed their forces shot down Indian aircraft involved in the strikes. They also reported, and this is a major point of contention, 31 civilian deaths resulting from the Indian action.
31 civilian deaths. That's a serious claim. How did India respond to that?
India flatly denied losing any aircraft. There was even that somewhat dry comment from an official, something like, "Our planes are home, sipping chai." Basically, a complete dismissal of Pakistan's claims about downed jets. On the civilian casualties, India didn't directly engage with the number, but implied skepticism, sticking to their narrative of targeting terrorist infrastructure precisely.
So an immediate information war kicks off alongside the military action.
Always. Controlling the narrative is a huge part of these confrontations.
Let's shift gears a bit and look at the politics inside India. Because Operation Sindoor didn't just happen out of the blue, politically speaking. It came after the 2024 general election results.
That's right, and those results were interesting. The BJP won, secured a third term for Modi, but they lost their outright majority. They needed coalition partners. Some saw this as maybe a slight dent in the brand Modi image, which had seemed almost invincible.
So this operation, happening when it did, could be seen through that political lens.
Very much so. The timing and the way it was framed carries significant political weight in that context.
And the BJP's social media machinery, it kicked into high gear almost instantly, didn't it?
Oh, immediately. It was quite something to watch. Hashtags like hashtag Operation Sindoor just exploded online. You saw countless posts linking the strikes directly back to the Pahalgam attack. Lots of emphasis on revenge, on strength.
There was some pretty strong language used, too, I remember.
Very strong. One post that got a lot of attention used this phrase about wiping off the vermilion of the nation's daughters, referring to Sindoor, and framing the operation as avenging that. Very emotive language.
And Amit Malviya, who heads up a lot of their IT cell work, he even dropped a quote from that Liam Neeson movie, Taken.
He did. The "I have a very particular set of skills" line. It's a deliberate framing, right? Casting Modi as this powerful protector figure who will hunt down those who harm India.
It plays into that strongman image. But the name itself, Operation Sindoor, that seems like the most powerful piece of political messaging. Let's unpack that symbolism again.
It's incredibly layered. Sindoor, the red powder Hindu married women wear. It's not just cosmetic. It signifies marriage, sanctity, the husband's well-being, family honor. It's deeply embedded in culture and tradition.
So naming the operation after it.
It frames the entire military action as a defense of something deeply cultural, something core to Indian identity, especially for the Hindu majority. It taps into tradition, honor, protection. And it connects directly back to the Pahalgam victims. The narrative was built around avenging the women whose Sindoor was wiped away by the terrorists killing their husbands.
Malviya's post made that link explicit, you said.
Yes, very clearly tying the name Sindoor to the act of avenging the Pahalgam attack. It's powerful, emotionally resonant messaging.
And you have state elections coming up in India. This narrative, presenting Modi as the strong protector defending national honor, that plays well politically, presumably.
You'd have to assume that's part of the calculation, yes. It reinforces that image ahead of crucial state polls. It's a very potent narrative.
Now, something else that really stood out in the aftermath was who India chose to front the official media briefing. That felt quite deliberate.
It really did. Having Colonel Sophia Qureshi from the Army and Wing Commander Vyomika Singh from the Air Force lead that briefing was, I think, a very smart, strategic choice.
Tell us about them.
Well, Colonel Qureshi, she's a Muslim officer and comes from a family with a history of military service. Wing Commander Singh is a helicopter pilot and, importantly, a first-generation officer, meaning her family wasn't military before her.
So putting these two women out front, announcing this major operation, what's the message there?
It sends several messages, actually. First, it's a powerful statement about the role of women in India's armed forces today, showcasing capability, leadership.
Right.
Second, Colonel Qureshi's presence offers a subtle but clear counter-narrative to Pakistan's frequent communal rhetoric. It presents a picture of inclusivity within India's military and society.
Undercutting attempts to frame it as purely a Hindu nationalist action.
Potentially, yes. And Wing Commander Singh, as a young achiever from a non-military background, she kind of embodies the idea of a new India meritocratic, modern, forward-looking.
There was that touching story about Colonel Qureshi's father, too.
Yes, her twin sister mentioned it. Their father, a retired Army officer himself, apparently watched the briefing just beaming with pride seeing his daughter up there. It adds a very human touch to the whole thing.
So, zooming out again, how did the rest of the world react? You've got two nuclear powers involved here. That always makes capitals nervous.
Extremely nervous. And the global reaction reflected that. The general tone was one of, caution and widespread calls for de-escalation. Don't let this spiral.
Any specific reactions that stood out?
The U.S., under President Trump, called the situation a shame, urged both sides to pull back. Secretary of State Rubio said they were monitoring closely, standard diplomatic language, but the concern was clear.
And
China called it regrettable, preached restraint. Again, fairly predictable. The UK's Trade Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, even offered to mediate. Others, like the UAE, chimed in with calls for calm. The UN pointed towards previous agreements like the Simla Agreement and Lahore Declaration as frameworks for dialogue.
basically, everyone's saying, please calm down.
Pretty much. The nuclear dimension just hangs over everything. India, for its part, did try to manage the international reaction afterwards. They briefed envoys from 5 key countries, the P5, essentially.
And what was their message in those briefings?
India's Foreign Secretary, Vikram Misri, emphasized that the action was proportionate and specifically targeted known terrorist groups, linking it to UN counterterrorism mandates, trying to frame it as a legitimate anti-terror op, not an act of aggression against Pakistan itself.
Okay, let's bring it back home to India. Beyond the BJP's messaging, what was the feeling across the wider political spectrum and among ordinary people?
Well, initially at least, there was quite a broad consensus of support. Major opposition parties like Congress, AAP, BSP, even AMIM and Mamata Banerjee's TMC, they all came out expressing support for the armed forces.
Mamata Banerjee just tweeted Jai Hind. Okay.
Yes, short, simple, but clear support. And you also heard from people directly impacted by the Pahalgam attack. One victim's relative, Rajesh Narwal, spoke about feeling a sense of closure, hoping it prevents future attacks. That's a powerful emotional response.
But was it unanimous support, or were there voices of caution too?
There were definitely voices urging caution. The CPI-ML Liberation Party, for example, warned against jingoism. They supported action against terror, but stressed the need for diplomacy, warning against letting things escalate into a war frenzy.
So a mix of patriotism and worry. What about the general public? Social media trends?
Hashtag Operation Sindoor was huge, obviously. Lots of patriotic posts, celebrity endorsements, Sachin Tendulkar, Akshay Kumar, the actor, Allu Arjun. They all tweeted support for the forces. But alongside that, you could sense an undercurrent of anxiety about what Pakistan might do next. And interestingly, you also saw reactions from Pakistani celebrities online, naturally offering a very different perspective.
Let's circle back to that name, Sindoor, one more time, because it feels like it's more than just a clever political tag. It carries real cultural weight.
It absolutely does. Beyond the political use, Sindoor itself represents identity, marital honor, family well-being, resilience. It's loaded with meaning.
So naming the operation after.
It elevates the military action. It frames it not just as retaliation, but as a defense of India's cultural core, its traditions, its honor, especially when linked so directly to the female victims of Pahalgam, whose loss was symbolized by the loss of Sindoor.
And having the women officers, Colonel Qureshi and Wing Commander Singh, announce it.
It just amplifies that symbolism, doesn't it? Women as symbols of what's being defended, and also as the capable defenders themselves. It's a very potent combination.
Okay, but let's be realistic. Operations like this, especially between nuclear-armed neighbors, carry huge risks. What were the main dangers here?
The risks are definitely significant. First and foremost, Pakistan's vow to retaliate. That's always the immediate concern. Their claims of civilian casualties, whether accurate or not, could easily be used domestically to justify a strong response. That risks escalation.
And India's own actions post-strike.
Well, India reportedly planned Air Force war games soon after. While likely meant to signal readiness, Pakistan could easily see that as provocative. Another step up the escalation ladder.
And the nuclear shadow is always there.
Always. Miscalculation, misinterpretation. The consequences could be catastrophic. That's the ultimate risk. Domestically in India, there's also the risk that the strong nationalist rhetoric fueled by the operation could spill over into jingoism, maybe even worsen communal tensions. And of course, there's the economic cost. These things aren't cheap.
So, stepping back, how does Operation Sindoor fit into India's bigger strategy towards Pakistan? Is this a shift or part of an ongoing approach?
It seems less like a fundamental shift and more like a perhaps sharper application of an existing long-term
Very
strategy.
good.
Basically, keeping sustained pressure on Pakistan, diplomatically trying to isolate them over terrorism,
Hmm.
economically highlighting their vulnerabilities, and militarily demonstrating India's capability and willingness to act decisively against cross-border threats.
So isolate pressure and project strength.
That seems to be the goal. The post-strike diplomatic briefings fit into that, managing the narrative, justifying the action internationally. It's about projecting India as a strong, decisive actor on the world stage, one that won't tolerate attacks on its soil.
But the big questions remain.
Exactly. Can India sustain this level of pressure? Can it maintain domestic unity if there's retaliation or prolonged tension? Those are the key uncertainties looking ahead.
So, wrapping this up, Operation Sindoor was clearly much more than just a cross-border strike.
Oh, absolutely. It was a bold move, yes, hitting terrorist targets, but it was also deeply layered with political calculation, powerful cultural symbolism, and carried both immediate impacts and potentially very significant long-term implications for the region.
Key takeaways seem to be India's assertive stance, the deliberate political messaging, especially through the name, and that potent use of symbolism.
Precisely. It underscored India's hardening position on terrorism originating from Pakistan, while also playing heavily on domestic political and cultural narratives. And it leaves us watching a very tense, very complex relationship.
It really does. This deep dive shows just how many factors are at play. The history, the politics, the culture, the military realities. It's not just about May 7th. It's about everything that led up to it and everything that might follow. Definitely a situation to keep a close eye on.
For sure. What happens next is the big question.
Indeed. Well, thank you for joining us and helping us unpack all of that today. It's been incredibly insightful.